The Ku Klux Klan is the oldest terrorist group in the United States.
For 5,000 years, the white man has been the supreme race. We, the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, intend to keep it.
This secret society of white supremacists preaches hatred of black people, and its long history goes back decades. It has reemerged again and again. Its crimes have caused bloodshed in America for more than 150 years. 150 years of hatred, racism, and horror.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
I don't believe in segregation, I believe in slavery.
150 years of exclusion, violence, and rage. This tale of cruelty still haunts the United States.
In June 1865, the American Civil War finally came to an end. After 4 years of deadly combat, claiming more than 700,000 lives, the abolitionist North finally defeated the pro-slavery Southern states. General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox, and a few months later, the 13th Constitutional Amendment ended slavery. Nearly 4 million of the South's 9 million inhabitants had been enslaved, and at last they were free of their chains. For plantation owners, this revolution was unbearable.
Slave owners were, of course, terrified by the end of slavery. They were terrified economically that they would lose their very cheap labor force, but they were also terrified that African American people would start to demand the rights of citizenship.
In 1865, a handful of Confederate veterans of Scottish descent decided to create a secret society in the town of Pulaski, Tennessee.
It was originally designed to be a fraternal order. It was designed as a joke. It was literally designed for a bunch of guys to have a reason to hang out and drink beer and just like take care of each other.
They were young men, they were bored, they lived in a small town called Pulaski, Tennessee, and they decided to form a little secret society.
The veterans initially wanted to share stories about battles and the good old days for the slave-owning South. They gave their group a mysterious name, Ku Klux Klan.
We don't know why they chose the name Ku Klux Klan. People say it's because that's the sound a shotgun would make when it was cocked, cluck, cluck, you know, Ku Klux, like that. The one that is most broadly accepted is meant to be named after the Greek word for circle, kuklos. And that makes a certain amount of sense when you realize that the people who founded the Klan were educated in Latin and Greek and did use Latin phrases in particular in some of their other writings. They were very invested in the fact that they were well educated.
They added the word clan, a common term in Scotland, to the Greek phrase kuklos, and started each word with a K. The Klan was born. Their first public appearances in Pulaski were peaceful. But soon, harassment and intimidation of former slaves became commonplace.
The very first Klan group in Pulaski was essentially a group that kind of played pranks. They would dress up in very elaborate costumes, not the white sheets that we see today, and they would go around and try and scare people or play pranks. They often would try and frighten freed slaves who they thought were so superstitious that they would believe they were ghosts and so on.
Rumors spread that the masked men were ghosts of Confederate soldiers killed in combat and back for revenge. Fear spread among former slaves. Soon, brotherhoods began to emerge across the South with names like the Knights of the White Camellia, the White League, and the Red Shirts. They all used the same intimidation tactics. Klansmen would stake out territory in front of polling stations to keep black men from voting. The South had to stay in white hands.
They became a kind of paramilitary organization, or more properly said, a bunch of little paramilitary organizations, which very quickly, in the course of a year or so, became the violent enforcers of what black people could do and could not do.
African Americans resisted, sometimes even bearing arms, but the murders and lynchings continued.
It's very important to understand that in lynching an individual, their goal was to intimidate the whole mass. That is what terrorism is. And to a very large extent, they succeeded, because while slavery was abolished, the complete subordination of African Americans continued. Unable to vote, unable to get decent jobs, unable to have education, unable to have health care. It was a very successful campaign by a small terrorist organization.
The Klan and its so-called men of justice began to get a reputation. Groups sprung up across the South, and recruitment exploded. The Klan still needed a charismatic individual to lead the fight. For the role, they chose a hero to Southerners from the War of Secession, General Nathan Bedford Forrest.
Nathan Bedford Forrest was a romantic figure. He was a celebrity. He was just kind of known as kind of like a man who's going to do what needs to be done, right? So he was sort of, he had that reputation, and he was happy to have his face put on it. He clearly indicated that he was the head of the Klan.
For a group as violent as the Klan, Forrest was an ideal leader, with a brutal reputation. A former slave trader, he had committed a number of war crimes. With Forrest at their helm, the Klansmen stepped up their attacks. The violence reached its peak in 1868. With the presidential elections approaching, dozens of courthouses, churches, and polling places went up in flames. More than 1,000 murders were committed in 4 weeks. Former slaves could by no means be allowed to exercise their rights. Doing so would have upset the system of white dominance. And they chose their victims systematically.
The main thing that the first Klan was trying to accomplish was the deactivation, the politicide of African Americans within the South. So they particularly targeted African Americans who voted. They even more so targeted African Americans who held office. And in many cases, they didn't go to the African Americans who held office in order to say, you need to resign your office or we're going to be back. They went in and they killed them outright. because they understood that these were people that were already established as leaders. They understood that these were people that others in the community looked to as individuals who could kind of exemplify what it meant to assert oneself as a citizen within the society. And those people needed to be neutralized.
The Reconstruction-era Klan was also happy to target white Republicans, those that they saw as acting in the political interests that would further African-American power.
In Washington, policymakers planned to take down the invisible empire, whatever it took. Congress adopted a series of laws to oppose the Klan, and martial law was declared. The Federal Army, still deployed in the South, was mobilized to fight the Klan and ordered to protect black voters. Slowly, the clampdown began to yield results. In 1872, the Klan officially disbanded. But it was too late. White supremacists didn't need them anymore.
When free black slaves and their sympathizers were pushed away, when black people became more and more afraid to vote because it could cost them their lives, the work of the Klan was essentially done.
In 1877, the Federal Army pulled out of the South with mixed results. The end of slavery was meant to give way to an era of equality. Instead, it was slowly replaced with segregation, which lasted for nearly a century. Blacks and whites wouldn't mix in daily life. Schools, shops, public transportation, hospitals, and more were all affected. African Americans would be separated from the white population, which fully retained power. Black people remained second-class citizens. The values of the Klan's invisible empire had spread among the general population. Lynchings of African Americans were common. The federal government turned a blind eye.
Photos from lynchings would be sold and used as postcards. There would be souvenirs from these sorts of events. People would want to take pictures in front of someone who was victimized in a lynching. So these are acts that involved, directly or indirectly, tacitly, broad swaths of the white population.
At the beginning of the 20th century, a new world was taking shape. Vertical cities emerged, and America became a country of immigration. Millions of Europeans, Catholics from the South, Jews from the East, set off to the world's leading industrial powerhouse and the promise of a better future. The Klan had fallen into obscurity, and then, 50 years after the Civil War, it was born again from its ashes. In February 1915, The Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith was released. The film was an adaptation of a successful play called The Klansman. A long feature film, it looked back at the Civil War and Reconstruction. D.W. Griffith was an innovator, integrating elaborate battle scenes, realistic decor, and swelling music. The Birth of a Nation was a major cinematic experience that broke with the more amateurish, low-budget films typical of early cinematography. In the second half of the film, Griffith depicted scenes from the post-war era. Klansmen were shown not as criminals, but as justice doers.
Scholars of film look at it as very innovative and progressive in terms of its use of lighting, use of actors, and so on. But the core of this was the understanding that in the movie that these black men are really threatening to kidnap and rape white women all over the place.
It presented the Ku Klux Klan romantically. It presented the Ku Klux Klan as justified. All of this means that someone has to ride, literally, in on a white horse and not only restore order, but restore honor.
The noble Klansmen did their version of justice, and the audience wanted more. The film rekindled curiosity about the Ku Klux Klan, and one man in particular took advantage of this: William Joseph Simmons. The former traveling preacher, born in Alabama, was a member of fraternal orders. In November 1915, he organized an ascent of Stone Mountain near Atlanta. Simmons dreamed of reestablishing the Ku Klux Klan to capitalize on Confederate heritage and make some money along the way. Hiding his face behind a skull mask, Simmons created a ritual, secret ceremonies, and coded words. He proclaimed himself the imperial wizard of what he called the Invisible Empire. He wrote the Koran, the Klansman's code of honor. A new KKK was born, with a leader and its own laws. While the birth of a nation was spreading its venom, Simmons made announcements in the press declaring the rebirth of the Klan. The film thus became a 180-minute advertisement glorifying his movement. Simmons's hooded horsemen could be seen on film posters and in newspapers throughout the country.
The popular image of the Klan, as we often think about it, is fundamentally created by Griffith's Birth of a Nation. That is the film that creates the image of the white hood and robes that then gets adopted by the Second Klan.
The Birth of a Nation is considered to be the first Hollywood blockbuster. More than 50 million Americans watched this racist film in awe. For most viewers, the spectacular battles, Lincoln's assassination, and of course the Klan's heroic victories were seen as truth.
This movie was seen as, in effect, telling the story of the South after the Civil War. And so it really becomes the predominant way that people in America understand Southern history, and which, of course, is bound up in our national history.
African Americans organized to fight back against this propaganda. The NAACP, a group created to defend their civil rights, tried to get the film banned, and some cities boycotted it. But those in power remained unmoved, and Griffith's work ended up being the first feature film to be shown at the White House for a sitting president, the Democrat Woodrow Wilson.
Wilson praised it. He thought it was great. He was absolutely a racist and a segregationist. That doesn't mean that he would necessarily have approved of Klansmen going around and lynching people. It's also important to understand that Wilson was himself a Southerner. He depended on votes from the South for his position. In the South, you had basically an electorate that was only white, and Woodrow Wilson could not afford to contradict them.
The Birth of a Nation gave the Klan a nationwide audience. For his part, Joseph Simmons was ambitious and felt his little business had a big future in store. And that meant he needed to advertise. So the Imperial Wizard hired two marketing experts, Elizabeth Tyler and Edward Clark. The two advertising specialists understood how to help the organization make money. They concocted a pyramid scheme.
There is a business to the Klan, and it's called Klan members. You pay a membership fee, and all the money that you pay every month, your dues, go to the Imperial Wizard, and he uses that money to travel around and party with everybody at these damn Klan lighting ceremonies, these cross light ceremonies. It pays his bills, he uses it to buy alcohol, he doesn't work, he doesn't have a job, we have jobs. It's just a scam, man. The whole thing is a scam.
The sermons, the meetings, and nighttime ceremonies drew in more and more people. In just a few months, the group went from 2,000 to 300,000 members. Charging $10 to join, the Klan became rich and powerful, starting with its Imperial Wizard, His Majesty William Joseph Simmons.
Well, for a while in the 1920s, the Klan was exceedingly powerful and had a great deal of money. William Joseph Simmons, for instance, the first leader of the Second Era Klan, lived in a multi-million-dollar mansion. So for a while, with all of these dues coming in, it was incredibly successful.
The new world was changing, and the fears of the Protestant majority grew in step. The Klan knew it needed to move with the times and expanded its business of hatred. In addition to hating black people, the Klan adopted anti-immigrant, anti-urban, anti-communist, anti-Semitic, and anti-Catholic positions. The organization grew spectacularly, as did its bank account. The secret society rose to become one of the most important political organizations in the country. Spilling out of its southern base, the Klan flooded the rest of the country. On August 8, 1925, more than 40,000 members paraded down Pennsylvania Avenue. It was a huge show of strength. They were not afraid to show their faces, and its new leader, Hiram Evans, proudly marched along the group. The invisible empire had never seemed so powerful.
Estimates put Klan membership at somewhere upward of 4 million members, which was a really significant proportion of the country's population, especially when we consider all of the groups who were excluded from joining the Klan. You were only allowed to become a Klan member if you had been born in the United States, if you were white, and if you were a Protestant. And so when we think about it, narrowing the population down along those lines, 4 million members is a terrifyingly large percentage of that population.
As the cameras focused on the march, another scene was taking place off-screen. Lobbyists for the Klan were working overtime in the background, and their influence on American political life was considerable. In the 1920s, the Invisible Empire helped elect 11 governors, 75 representatives, and 16 senators. Even Harry Truman, the future American president, admitted in his memoirs that he had briefly belonged to the Klan in his youth for electoral reasons.
When we say that someone like Harry Truman was a member, you have to remember this was a completely respectable thing to be. Many places, people joined the Klan because it brought them status. It was a highly respected community organization. Furthermore, the Klan chapters, the Klaverns, functioned to do what we today call networking. You meet other people. You meet people who might be your customers or who could give you a job or you could do a business deal with. There was an awful lot of economic incentive to be a part of the Klan in certain locations.
The Klan was powerful enough to make or break a career. At the Democratic National Convention of 1924, it blocked the nomination of a candidate, Al Smith. For two good reasons. Smith was a Catholic and opposed Prohibition. But the Klan's greatest victory was getting a draconian immigration law passed.
The Klan helped to pass the Immigration Act of 1924, which for the first time created an immigration quota system in the United States that extremely much favored Northern European whites. In other words, people from Germanic countries and the United Kingdom. So from 1924 until 1965, when the immigration system was reformed, the United States essentially had a Klan-devised immigration system which limited, more or less, immigration to the United States to so-called Aryans.
The organization owned its own newspapers, like the Fiery Cross and the Searchlight, which published its leaders' propaganda. The message was always anti-Black, anti-Catholic, and anti-Semitic. And even advertisers heeded the call, taking every opportunity to insert the letters KKK.
They are holding rodeos and jousting tournaments. They are appearing in popular novels. They are in popular films. They are in popular music. They are on the radio, and they are selling you newspapers on the street corner. And so they really become a major part of American cultural life.
The cult-like society sold well, and the Klan was everywhere. Its hooded figures appeared in animated and short films. Even comedic actor Harold Lloyd did a slapstick performance of escaping from their clutches. In 1924, the KKK even appeared in one of the first short films produced by Walt Disney, featuring kids mimicking Klansmen.
The Klan was by far the biggest social movement of the 1920s. And it was not only a mass organization with somewhere between 3 and 6 million people, but it was a family organization with activities for children, for young women, for young men.
At the same time that the Klan was hosting wholesome activities by day, its crimes continued in the shadows.
The KKK had managed the unthinkable. It had become respectable. Its imperial wizard even graced the cover of Time magazine.
I think the most important thing to understand, and perhaps the most frightening thing, is that they had achieved a certain kind of respectability. They were viewed by many people as a legitimate, fraternal, political group in the United States.
But this golden age wouldn't last. At the end of the 1920s, several scandals weakened the movement. David Stevenson was the KKK's new strongman and Grand Dragon of Indiana, who oversaw 100,000 Klansmen. He was convicted of raping and murdering his secretary.
He kidnapped, he tortured by biting, and he raped and killed his female assistant. And it was so shocking. This was covered in the New York Times in the West Coast. And I think for some people, well, this is going too far. We need to move away from this. One of the great aims of the Klan of the 1920s was protecting the chastity of white women. So they were all about 100% Americanism, as they called it, standing up for white women and their honor and so on, their virtue. Well, you know, when you had arguably the most famous Klansman in America convicted of this incredible rape and ultimately murder of Madge Oberholzer, it completely destroyed first the Indiana Klan, and then in waves, the rest of the Klan collapsed.
Sentenced to life in prison, Stevenson had nothing to lose and began sharing secrets. In July 1927, he sent documents to the press incriminating Indiana state officials who had been corrupted by the Klan. Governor Ed Jackson, along with many others, faced charges. A letter from John Duval, the mayor of Indianapolis, revealed the extent of the rot. Soon it was Edward Clark's turn to be prosecuted. The Klan's communications man had regularly been seen in the company of prostitutes and sipping on whiskey, defying the religious values promoted by the Klan.
They used to say, if Jesus was alive today, he would be a Klansman.
One of the many contradictions associated with the KKK is the fact that the leaders are rarely, if ever, living up to the moral values that they are demanding of their members.
People all over the country saw this, and that was, in a way, the beginning of a kind of public awareness of this group wasn't really the heroic and patriotic organization that it claimed to be.
At the end of the 1920s, the Great Depression ravaging the United States further weakened the organization. Its members no longer had the money to pay their dues. President Roosevelt's economic recovery policies transformed the rural South and created jobs. The Klan no longer acted as a social stepladder, and poor whites moved on. Following his election, Roosevelt reauthorized the consumption of alcohol. The Invisible Empire had lost the battle over prohibition. It wouldn't be its last defeat. In 1939, Hollywood adapted the bestseller Gone with the Wind, another panoramic tale of the Civil War abounding with racist prejudice. But although the Klan had a strong presence in Margaret Mitchell's bestseller, it was completely cut from the film. In September 1939, World War II broke out in Europe. True to its hateful message, the Klan temporarily allied itself with an American pro-Nazi party, the Bund. The United States entered the war in December 1941 after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The brown shirts of the Bund and the white hoods both disappeared from public life.
World War II had an impact in turning people away from the Klan because the example of Nazi policy made various kinds of bigotry less popular, but also because there was a movement to publicize the diversity of the armed forces, which then had so many Jews and so many Catholics fighting for America. So it was a little hard to maintain that hostility toward those groups at that time.
On May 8, 1945, after 4 years of war, victory was declared in Europe. On September 2nd, Japan officially surrendered, and America had won. But the Klan wasn't feeling festive. The IRS began auditing the organization. The Invisible Empire hadn't paid its taxes in the 1920s, and now they owed $685,000. For the second time in its history, the Klan disappeared. But the Hydra's hooded heads didn't take long to grow back. The post-war situation provided fertile ground for its resurrection. In addition to the creeping fear of communism, white supremacists were also worried about returning African American GIs.
After the Second World War, we had enormous numbers of black servicemen coming back to this country for the first time. And they had seen in Europe, particularly in France, but in many countries, that they were treated completely different. They were treated as if they were actually people. Plus, they had, for the first time, borne arms. They had been given weapons. Many of them had shot white people. So people came back, African Americans came back to the United States with a completely changed sensibility about who they were. I fought for my country. I fought against racism, against anti-Semitism. Why can't I be a full citizen like everyone else?
Back in the U.S., African Americans protested against segregation and for their civil rights. Many veterans refused to give up their seats to whites in public transportation. More and more incidents ensued. White Southerners weren't ready to accept this thirst for freedom.
The Ku Klux Klan returns to the South. Complete with traditional white hoods, the sheet shortage notwithstanding, about 700 Klansmen prepare for the first meeting to be photographed since 1941. The assembly point atop Stone Mountain is 16 miles east of Atlanta, Georgia. Klan leaders predict similar revivals throughout America.
In October 1946, the organization was taken over by Samuel Green, a member of the Klan since the 1920s. A doctor from Georgia, Green began organizing numerous ceremonies and doing extensive advertising for them. He sold the rights to photograph them to the media, including Life magazine.
We don't hate God made him black, and he made us white. And you will find this laid out in the 11th chapter of Genesis, in which he segregated the races. And we, knowing that for 5,000 years the white man has been the supreme race, we, the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan, intend to keep it the white race.
Despite going bankrupt, the Klan had maintained an underground network. There were still thousands of people willing to pledge allegiance to the organization.
The ceremony that takes place, it's called the naturalization ceremony. Take an oath of allegiance and swear to protect the white race, and you'll never turn your back on your brothers, and, you know, just things like that. Just really, it's really childish. But for me, when I felt, I felt enlightened. I felt like I belonged to something, like I finally did it. I earned this. I worked for it, and they make it a point to make you feel proud of it. Like, they want you to feel proud of it.
The Invisible Empire was once again on the march. But an unexpected obstacle appeared in its way.
Up in the sky, look! It's a bird! It's a plane! It's Superman!
This looks like a job for Superman.
In 1946, this particular superhero was already very popular. His adventures appeared in cartoons and comics. And on a radio show, he fought a criminal organization oddly similar to the KKK. Its name? The Klan of the Fiery Cross.
Now the adventures of Superman. Clark Kent tracked down a boy he believed knew the identity of the robed and hooded bigots. What has happened to the cunning, half-mad leader of the Klan of the Fiery Cross? We'll find out in just a moment. So stand by for the exciting climax of today's episode.
The originator of this project, Stetson Kennedy, was a journalist who had infiltrated the Klan and learned its secrets. And he convinced the producers of The Adventures of Superman to warn young Americans about its toxic ways. The program was a major success.
The idea of having Superman fight the Klan on the radio in the 1940s is a really important and effective piece of propaganda in putting forward the idea that the Klan is un-American. The tragic irony is that Superman's catchphrase, of course, was truth, justice, and the American way, which is phrasing that would have been very at home in a Klan pamphlet of the 1920s.
Stetson Kennedy didn't stop there. He went to Congress dressed as a Klansman to raise awareness and denounce the lack of democracy in the American South. His performance worked. Beginning in 1947, the Department of Justice added the Klan to the list of subversive organizations. The KKK reemerged weak after the war, with only around 20,000 members, very few compared to the 4 million in the 1920s. But the threat had yet to be eradicated. Soon, African Americans would demand civil rights much more forcefully. The battle for equality would bring the Klan back to life for a third time, but this time with ways even more brutal.